Hello, fifth years. Today we are going to be choosing a question for the sick rows and writing a plan for it. Okay. I like to think of writing an essay as a little bit like building a house. So, as you know, when you build a house, if you've got dodgy foundations, you're never going to have a good house. It's just going to lead to a load of problems later. So that's where we're at. We are building the foundations for our essay, and that means picking the right question and planning appropriately. Okay, so that's the focus of today's lesson. Underneath, you can see that I have written out the level of detail I'd expect of a plan for a question. Now, when it comes to like the exam, the checkpoint, by then your revision might be so complete in your head that you'll see a question and you'll be able to go with it immediately. I'm not saying that you need to write a plan, but at this stage, before you write an essay for me, it would be great for you to share with me your plan so I can just check through your ideas to make sure that there aren't any tweaks which could add to a better essay. So below you can see I've chosen a question which is choose a poem which has imagery or contrast. Okay, so there are always two parts to an SQA question. The first part asks you to choose something. My example, I'm going to choose contrast. Okay, and the second part of the question asks you to explain how whatever it is you've chosen links to the wider themes or wider messages of the novel. And that's where last lesson's social warnings come in. Now, with my question that I've chosen today, I could have gone for imagery, but because it's a model question, I thought I might challenge myself a bit. So let's pretend I went for imagery. You could have done that, couldn't you? You could have talked about the image of the rose and talked about the three roses that there are. You could have picked another image of the howling storm. It's not actually a storm. It could be the French Revolution. It could be a rape. And finally, you could have talked about the invisible worm, okay? Or Crimson Joy, sort of, but more of the invisible worm is definitely an image, okay? I just felt that was too simple and I'm, wasting your time going through it because it's so obvious. So I picked 3 examples of contrast in the essay. So if you remember, it's a 5-paragraph essay. Paragraph 1 intro, paragraph 5 conclusion. So I need to pick out 3 quotes. So first thing I do is I look at the question and I underline the key word. So I've chosen this keyword to be contrast. At this point, when I'm choosing my question, I think to myself, have I got 3 examples of contrast in the essay? And I thought about it, and I had. Initially, I was thinking, I've only got 2. But I looked through the poem again. Obviously, you'd remember it on the day. And I spotted a third that I hadn't really thought about in that much detail, that I've twisted to be a contrast. So the answer is yes. If you can't find 3 examples for paragraph 2, 3, and 4 of whatever it is you're looking for, choose another question or choose another bit of the question. Okay, so if I couldn't find 3 contrasts, I'd be like, well, can I find 3 images? Oh yes, I can go with that one. Right. Step 1, can you find 3 examples? Second step is, right, see this word, that is the key word for me, it's contrast. I need to define a contrast because that's going to be my argument, but not only define what a contrast is, define a contrast in terms of this poem. So that's what I did. On like a C level or a B level, I might just say a contrast is 2 opposite ideas. But in the context of this poem, 2 opposite ideas that are deliberately brought together to provide a political and moral warning to something very, very, someone very, very dear to Blake. Do you see what I mean? That's the difference. I'm taking it beyond two opposites. I'm kind of dragging in the context. It's providing a warning against the French Revolution, or warning against spiritual depravity, and, you know, warning against the anarchy of many different situations. So that's what I do. So second step is, can I define the term and in the context of the poem, just for this poem, not just what is contrast in this poem? And my answer is yes. Okay, so I've got to step 3. Step 3 is when, and I wouldn't expect you necessarily to do this in the checkpoint, but at this point, thinking about ordering the quotations. Now, usually I like to do quotations in order of the poem, because usually a poem starts off with simple ideas and they get more complicated because the poet can build on them. And so it kind of fits our essay in a way. A good essay should start off with simple ideas, like a magic trick. Start off very simply and build in complexity. So your last idea should be your most complicated idea. Okay, so think, I don't know if you can remember Paul Daniels. He started off with card tricks and ended up with sewing Debbie McGee in half. Now, if he'd started with sewing his assistant in half and he didn't have any more complicated tricks beyond that, the audience would be like, oh, great, well, you've kind of showed me the best bit already. Where it's the same with your essay writing. Start off simply, a simple contrast for me, and then I'm going to build up to my most impressive idea, which happens to be the last lines of the poem. There are certain questions, and we will go through these questions in detail, where they deliberately ask you to look at something out of order, like choose a poem which has an effective ending. Well, in paragraph 2, you're going to have to go for the ending, aren't you? So it's kind of all out of sync. Or something like choose a poem where there's a conflict, and maybe the conflict, you have to look at that paragraph 2 and then you go back on yourself. But we will look at those in more detail. But I'd say for about 60% of the essay questions, you go in order of the poem, because that's how the less complicated ideas become more complicated. Right, so I've picked my 3 quotes, and the last one is more complicated. Fine. Now, next step is to look at that quote and just briefly write down, not in detail, just what am I going to say about that one. First of all, what poetic technique am I going to look at? And then after that, what am I going to say about it? I don't want to be saying 3 things about contrast and the French Revolution, because that's going to be a really repetitive argument. I want to say something about contrast with Rosa Person, something about contrast with the Revolution, 3 examples of that. Okay. Also, I know I've been asked to look at 3 examples of contrast, but contrast can be achieved many ways in the poem, and I want to make sure I'm getting in my poetic techniques. So obviously there's a contrast, I've said, in tone. Oh, Rose, thou art sick. So a childish, simplistic tone, and yet the ideas in it are really sexual and really adult. So there's a contrast between the words, the word choice, and the content I'm going to argue. Okay, that's the one I couldn't think. I had to think a bit, but like, where's my 3rd example? Oh, I know there's a contrast between the tone and the content. I'm just going to go for that. And then similarly, for the last one, I'm going to use a contrast in rhyme. So even though it's a contrast, joy and destroy are linked through rhyme. Do you see what I mean? So even though I'm looking at 3 contrasts, I'm going to definitely put in 3 poetic techniques as well on top of that. So having planned it, yes, I can see I can write a good essay. I want you to do the same. I'm not going to give you any help. I'm not going to highlight the keyword for you. I'm not going to help you with the definition. I really want you to see what you can do on your own. These questions, the 2 questions I've offered you, they're all from the 2019 paper, and they all work for the 6 rows, which is good, isn't it? Because it means that any of them. Like, most questions can be answered on the 6 rows. Some of you might fly through it, some of you might find it horrendous. However, if you find it horrendous, it means that you're learning a lot, which is brilliant. You know what I mean? You can definitely improve, and learning is quite a tough experience. So persevere with it. Second, so if you've gone through it quite simply, great, try a second question. But it'll be quite interesting for me to see in your notes, if you haven't tried the second question, maybe it suggests to me that you struggled a bit with the first question. I will really look at that in depth. What I would ask you to do is, if you can't answer this, don't put down just a blank. Tell me what you couldn't do. If it was like, I couldn't see what the key word was in the question, or how on earth are there 3 examples of this? You know, tell me what bits you find hard, and equally, if you do it all wrong, that's actually a great foundation for me to correct you. I can't really correct a blank space, but I can correct ideas that just need to be shifted a bit. Good luck. It is a difficult lesson, but you're clever, so you'll be fine. Bye. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow's meeting, Tuesday.